March 5, 1953. Stalin is dead. His family, once untouchable, is suddenly exposed, haunted by their surname as the Soviet Union collapses and state secrets flood into the light. Some fled, some fought, some vanished. What happened next turned inheritance into a curse. Who survived when Stalin's protection disappeared, and at what cost? The answer begins inside the gilded cage they could never fully escape. Svetlana Alliluyeva grew up behind Kremlin walls, the only daughter of Joseph Stalin. Her childhood was marked by privilege, but also by fear and the constant presence of guards. After her mother's suicide, Svetlana became the focus of her father's attention, an attention that could turn cold and controlling in an instant. As she grew older, Stalin dictated her relationships, exiling a lover to Siberia and choosing her career path. Even in the shadow of absolute power, Svetlana's life was never her own. After Stalin's death, she remained in Moscow, teaching and translating, but the weight of her surname never lifted. In 1967, while in India to scatter the ashes of her late husband, Svetlana made a decision that stunned the world. She walked into the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi and requested asylum. Within weeks, she was flown out of the country under a false name, passing through Rome and Geneva before landing in New York. There, she burned her Soviet passport, publicly denounced her father's brutality, and began a new life as Lana Peters. Her memoir, published that same year, revealed intimate details of life inside Stalin's household. She wrote of a father who was both affectionate and tyrannical, of a regime built on suspicion and cruelty. In her own words, "He broke my life too, as he broke the lives of millions." The book became a sensation, but the freedom she found in the West was complicated. Lana Peters moved often, living in Switzerland, England, and the United States, marrying and divorcing, always restless. For a time, the royalties from her memoirs provided comfort, but the money faded, and so did the public's fascination. In 1984, she returned unexpectedly to the Soviet Union with her youngest daughter. The government welcomed her back and restored her citizenship, but she soon realized she could not stay. Disillusioned, she left again, settling in rural Wisconsin. There, the last years of her life were marked by solitude and financial hardship. She died in a nursing home in 2011, far from the corridors of power where her story began. Her daughter, Olga, later reflected that her mother never escaped the shadow of her father's name. For Svetlana, the price of freedom was exile, poverty, and a lifelong struggle to define herself apart from the legacy she inherited. Yakov Djugashvili entered adulthood under the weight of his father's reputation, but with little of its protection. As a young officer in the Red Army, Yakov was captured by German forces in 1941, just weeks after the Nazi invasion. The Germans offered Stalin a trade, Yakov for Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, their highest-ranking Soviet prisoner. Stalin refused, telling his generals that he would not trade a marshal for a lieutenant. This refusal removed what little protection Yakov had. Yakov died in captivity in 1943. The exact circumstances remain debated. Some say he was shot while trying to escape. Others claim suicide. His wife, Julia Meltzer, was arrested after his capture, separated from their daughter, and sent to the Gulag. She spent 2 years in the camps before being released, changed forever by the experience. Vasily, Stalin's younger son, grew up in a world shaped by power and privilege, but also by the unpredictable moods of his father. A talented pilot, Vasily rose quickly through the Soviet Air Force, commanding the Moscow military district by his late 20s. But the expectations placed on him proved suffocating. Vasily's drinking was an open secret, and his behavior was often reckless. In 1952, a drunken outburst cost him his command. After Stalin's death in March 1953, Vasily's fortunes collapsed. The new Soviet leadership saw him as a liability. He was arrested, stripped of his rank, and spent 7 years in prison. Released in 1960, Vasily lived the rest of his life in obscurity, dying of alcohol poisoning in 1962 at just 40 years old. For both brothers, the privileges of their father's rule came with a constant threat. Their fates, one lost in a German camp and the other destroyed by addiction and disgrace, stood as warnings for the family that survived them. When the Soviet Union dissolved in December 1991, the last traces of the old system vanished. Archives opened, revealing private letters and official secrets. The family's privileges, special pensions, state protection, the right to remain invisible, disappeared almost overnight. The shield that had once kept them safe was gone, replaced by a name that now drew scrutiny and suspicion. The collapse of the Soviet Union left Stalin's descendants exposed and fragile in a world that no longer offered them sanctuary. Yevgeny Djugashvili spent his final decades in Tbilisi, Georgia, confronting the world with the weight of his grandfather's name. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Yevgeny became a familiar figure in courtrooms and on television, defending Joseph Stalin's reputation against a tide of criticism. In 2009, he filed a defamation lawsuit against Novaya Gazeta, objecting to articles that called Stalin a murderer. The case drew national attention, but the court rejected his claim. Yevgeny lost, and the ruling stood as a public rebuke. Despite defeat, he remained unshaken, granting interviews and mounting exhibitions that recast Stalin as a misunderstood leader. He died in 2016, still convinced that history had treated his family unfairly. In Moscow, Alexander Berdansky chose a different path. Born into the Djugashvili line, he quietly adopted his mother's surname and built a career as a theater director. He rarely spoke of his ancestry, rarely granted interviews, and avoided the spotlight that others in his family courted or fled. Alexander's silence became a shield, allowing him to live and work in relative peace, even as the public debate over Stalin's legacy intensified around him. On the other side of the world, Chryse Evans grew up in Portland, Oregon, unaware of her connection to Stalin until her teenage years. The discovery unsettled her. She changed her name to Evans to distance herself from a legacy she never chose. Working as an antiques dealer, she tried to build a life on her own terms. In a rare interview, she said, "I carry his DNA, but not his choices." Today, an estimated 10 to 15 direct descendants of Stalin live scattered across Russia, Georgia, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Some, like Yevgeny, fought to protect the family name. Others, like Chryse, tried to erase it. And a few, like Alexander, simply disappeared into the background, choosing silence over spectacle. Stalin's legacy is not only found in the lives of his descendants, but in the objects, places, and public memory that outlived the man himself. The dacha outside Moscow, where he once ruled in private, now welcomes tourists, yet family members are barred from ownership or even entry into the room where Stalin died. State records list the Kuntsevo dacha as protected property, closed off by decree. Personal items, a pipe, a uniform, handwritten letters have surfaced in auction catalogs from London to Moscow. Some sales fetched tens of thousands of dollars, while relatives fought over proceeds they rarely received. Auctions and sales became a new arena of conflict. The family's control over their own history slipped away as archives opened and letters between Stalin and his children were published without consent. Archives that were once sealed became public property. Public opinion shifted too. In 2008, a Levada Center poll found that 54% of Russians viewed Stalin positively. By 2019, that number had climbed to 70%. The state's selective rehabilitation of Stalin's image brought his portrait back to Victory Day parades and state broadcasts, while descendants became occasional props for nationalist causes. Yet when Moscow unveiled a memorial to Stalin's victims in 2017, not a single family member attended. The memorial went unclaimed by those who carried his name. Therapists in Russia and Georgia have quietly noted the psychological toll carried by those who bear the Djugashvili name. Some descendants report anxiety, inherited guilt, or a sense of isolation, burdens that cannot be auctioned away or locked behind museum doors. The psychological burden is real. Jacob Djugashvili, an artist in Tbilisi, paints in silence, uncertain about the family's place in history. Chris Djugashvili courts the spotlight, using the name to secure a place on reality television. For the family, the battle over legacy is fought as much in the marketplace and public square as it is within their own minds. Stalin's descendants still live in the shadow of a name that divides nations and shapes power. In Russia today, 70% view him positively, while his family quietly bears the weight. The past isn't buried. It is inherited. History's judgment remains unfinished. What would you carry forward?